The Millionaire 6-year-old twins hadn't spoken a single word, until the day a new maid stepped into their home and achieved what no nanny had ever dared dream of. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. The Kingston mansion stood like a forgotten dream at the end of a long, winding lane. Tall iron gates groaned in the wind, and ivy crept slowly up the stone walls, as if nature itself was trying to pull the house into silence. Once, it had been alive, filled with music, laughter, and the warm voice of Mrs. Eleanor Kingston, who played her cello by the drawing-room window every evening. But that was years ago. Since her passing, the grand home had grown cold and still, as though holding its breath. Alexander Kingston, a man of sharp suits and sharper silence, lived there now with his twin sons, Ethan and Noah. He moved through the halls like a shadow, speaking only when necessary, his eyes always distant. The boys, 7 years old and mirror images of each other, had learned to walk softly, speak quietly, and never, ever make a mess. Grief had taught them that joy was dangerous. It reminded them of what they'd lost, and what their father could no longer give. Into this hush stepped Maya Alvarez. She arrived on a gray morning, the sky weeping light rain, her small suitcase in one hand and a bright yellow umbrella in the other. She wore a simple dress, a red scarf knotted loosely around her neck, and an apron that didn't match, half polka dots, half stripes, as if she'd sewn it from two different worlds. Her dark curls bounced with every step, and she hummed a tune no one had heard in that house for years. At the door, Alexander met her with a stiff nod. "You're Maya." "Yes, sir," she said, smiling. "Your job is to clean. Nothing else. No involvement with my children. Do your work quietly, and you'll do fine." She studied him, not with fear, but with quiet understanding. "I understand, Mr. Kingston." But as he turned away, Maya whispered to herself, just loud enough for the wind to carry, "Well, silence never raised a garden." She began that afternoon. Dusting the grand staircase, she used the feather duster like a microphone, singing softly into it, "Another day, another dollar, cleaning castles like a troubadour." She twirled, dipped, and laughed at her own silliness. From behind the heavy velvet curtains in the sitting room, two small faces peeked out, Ethan and Noah, wide-eyed and frozen. They had never seen anyone dance while cleaning. Never heard someone sing in this house. And then, from the smallest corner of Ethan's mouth, came a sound not heard in years, a giggle. Noah clapped a hand over his own mouth, but his shoulders shook. Unseen by Maya, Alexander watched it all on the security monitor in his study. His fingers hovered over the intercom. He should stop her. She was breaking the rules. But as he stared at the screen, watching his sons' faces lit with something like wonder, he found he couldn't move. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt hopeful. The morning after Maya's arrival, the house still carried the faint echo of her humming. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows, dust dancing in golden beams like tiny stars stirred awake. The silence hadn't vanished, but it had shifted, as if something inside the walls had begun to breathe again. Maya returned at 8 sharp, apron tied neatly, hair pulled into a messy bun with a pencil stuck through it. She greeted the empty hallway with a cheerful, "Good morning, Kingston Castle. Let's make today sparkle." And with that, she began. But this time, someone was watching from the shadows. Ethan stood just beyond the archway to the sitting room, barefoot and small in his oversized pajamas. He didn't step forward. He never did. But he didn't leave either. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying the woman who danced with dusters and talked to furniture like it had feelings. Maya pretended not to notice. Instead, she crouched beside the bookshelf, brushing dust from the spines with exaggerated care. "Ah, Captain Silence," she said softly, glancing sideways, "I see you lurking. Very stealthy. Top marks for sneaking." She gave a mock salute. But even the best spies need breakfast. "Did you eat?" Ethan blinked. No one had spoken to him like that in years. Not since Mama." He hesitated. Then, so quietly it was almost lost in the rustle of pages, he whispered, "Hi." Maya didn't jump, didn't cheer. She simply smiled, warm and steady, like sunrise. "Morning, Captain. Glad you decided to surface." That small word, "hi," hung in the air like a promise. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the long, echoing hallway, Maya spotted 2 dust bunnies under the antique console table. She gasped dramatically. "Oh no! The dust monsters have returned. They feast on forgotten corners and weak vacuum cleaners." She grabbed her duster like a sword. "But fear not. The cleaning night is here." She lunged playfully, swiping at the fluff. "1 down. 2 to go." A giggle burst from behind the door. "Are you sure they're gone?" a tiny voice asked. Maya turned. Noah stood there, eyes wide with excitement. She dropped to one knee. "Only one way to find out. We need a dust patrol. Brave recruits only." Noah looked back. Ethan stepped forward, just slightly. You want us to help?" he asked. "Of course," Maya said. "Best cleaners in the kingdom, I bet. Operation Dust Monster Hunt, begin." For the next hour, the mansion rang with laughter. The twins chased Fluff with feather dusters, shouted silly battle cries, and declared victory when the floor gleamed. Maya made up chants, turned polishing into a rhythm game, and taught them how to slide on socks across the hardwood, only on clean floors, mind you. And then, the front door opened. Alexander stood in the foyer, briefcase in hand, early from work, though he'd told no one. He'd come back by coincidence, he'd say later. But truth was, he'd been thinking of that security feed all day. Of 2 small boys, laughing. Now he saw it with his own eyes. His sons, red-cheeked and breathless, were dancing with Maya, their tiny hands gripping dusters like wands. Music played softly from Maya's phone, a cheerful tune he didn't recognize. The house, once a tomb, now pulsed with life. His first instinct was anger. She broke the rules. She involved them. She's making them vulnerable. But then Ethan laughed, a full, ringing sound, the kind that used to make Eleanor smile, and something inside Alexander cracked. He didn't speak. Didn't scold. He simply stood there, unnoticed, watching the only 2 people he loved in the world finally living again. And for the first time since the funeral, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own home. The days that followed were different. Not loud, not wild, but warmer. The silence in the Kingston mansion no longer pressed down like a weight. It had been replaced by something fragile, something tender, the sound of small feet running, hushed giggles behind doors, and the occasional burst of song drifting from the upstairs hallway. Maya moved through the house like a quiet storm of joy, turning chores into games, loneliness into companionship, and dust into adventure. But it was in the drawing room, long untouched, heavy with memory, that the true turning point came. One rainy afternoon, while the twins napped and Alexander worked in his study, Maya decided to clean the far corner of the grand drawing room. Curtains were drawn, and sunlight barely touched the old piano, the velvet armchairs, and a tall object covered in a dusty white sheet. She paused. Something about it felt different. Not forgotten, protected. Curious, she reached out and gently pulled the cloth away. Beneath it stood a cello, deep brown and richly carved, its wood glowing faintly even in the dim light. A single crack ran near the base, like a scar from a long-ago fall. Maya's breath caught. She had seen instruments like this only once, years ago, in a small music school in her hometown, where she'd taken lessons as a child. Her teacher, an old woman with kind eyes, had called the cello the voice of the heart. Maya ran her fingers lightly over the smooth wood. "You've been lonely too, haven't you?" she whispered. She hesitated. Mr. Kingston had made it clear, No one touches anything personal. But the instrument seemed to hum with a silent plea. And so, with trembling hands, she lifted it gently, tucked it under her chin the way she remembered, and drew the bow across the strings. A single note rang out, soft, deep, and aching. Then another. She played a simple melody, one her teacher had taught her, the shepherd's lullaby. It was a tune of comfort, of return, of love that never truly leaves. The music curled through the empty room like smoke, rising up the stairs, slipping under doors, filling corners that hadn't heard sound in years. Upstairs, Alexander froze. He had been reviewing contracts, pen in hand, when the music reached him. His breath stopped. His chest tightened. That melody, her melody. Eleanor used to play it every night before the boys were born. Every night before the illness took her voice, then her breath, then her. He dropped the pen. Without thinking, he strode down the hall, his steps sharp and fast, heart pounding like a drum. He pushed open the drawing room door. "Stop!" he barked. Maya jumped, the bow slipping from her fingers. The cello trembled in her arms. Alexander's face was pale, his jaw clenched. "No one touches that," he said, voice low and rough. "That belonged to my wife." I'm sorry," Maya stammered, setting the instrument down carefully. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," he snapped. "This house isn't yours to explore. That cello isn't yours to play." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I found it covered and forgotten. I thought, maybe it wanted to be heard again." "It's not about wanting," Alexander shot back. "It's about respect. About memory. You don't understand what it means." There was a long silence. Rain tapped against the windows. Then Maya took a breath and looked him in the eye. "No, Mr. Kingston. Maybe I don't know your pain. But I do know this, your sons laughed yesterday for the first time in years. They played. They lived. And your wife, she wouldn't want them growing up in a house of silence. She wouldn't want her music buried with her." Alexander stared at her. His anger flickered, then faltered. Because she was right. And for the first time since Eleanor's death, he didn't fight the truth. He didn't speak. He simply turned, walked to the cello, and ran his fingers over the crack in the wood, just once, before walking out, leaving the music and the moment hanging in the air. That night, from the top of the stairs, the twins watched as their father stood alone in the dark drawing room, one hand resting on the cello, silent tears on his cheeks. The house, at last, remembered how to grieve and how to hope. The morning after the cello incident, the house felt different, charged, as though a storm had passed and left the air clean and new. Maya arrived quietly, unsure of what to expect. She had braced herself for dismissal, for cold words, for the door to close behind her forever. But when she stepped into the foyer, the note on the hall table stopped her. "The boys' playroom needs cleaning. Do what you think is best. AK. No rules. No warnings. Just trust." Maya smiled, pressing the note to her heart. Later that day, the twins burst into the kitchen where she was polishing silver, their faces bright with excitement. "Maya!" Noah shouted. "We made something." Ethan held up a piece of paper covered in crayon scribbles, 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, 2 small, and a fourth with curly hair and a polka dot apron. Above them, in wobbly letters, it read, "The Magic Cleaning Club." Maya's eyes softened. "I'm honored. Every club needs a chant, you know." The boys leaned in, eager. She stood, raised her duster like a wand, and declared, "Dust and dirt, flee from sight. We are the cleaners, strong and bright. With soap and song and socks that slide. We'll make this house sparkle with pride." The twins shrieked with delight. "Again! Again!" And so, every afternoon, the chant echoed through the halls as they polished banisters, fluffed cushions, and turned mopping into a dance. They wore oven mitts as power gloves and tied scarves around their heads like capes. The mansion, once stiff and solemn, began to laugh. Then came the day Maya knocked on the study door. "Mr. Kingston?" Alexander looked up, tired but no longer cold. "Yes." She hesitated. "The boys, they've never really played with other children, have they?" He stiffened slightly. "They're fine." "But they're not just fine," Maya said gently. "They're amazing. And the world should see them. There's a storytelling hour at the library tomorrow, just down the lane. I thought, maybe you'd like to go." "With them?" "With me." Alexander opened his mouth to refuse, old fears rising. What if they panic? What if they don't speak? What if they're hurt? But then he remembered the chant drifting up the stairs, the way Ethan had finally looked him in the eye at breakfast, the way Noah had hugged him goodnight, for the first time in 2 years. So, against every instinct, he nodded. 1 hour. That's all. The next afternoon, the four of them walked down the garden path together, Alexander in a slightly loosened tie, the boys clutching Maya's hands, their eyes wide with nervous excitement. The library was small, warm, filled with children's laughter and the smell of old paper. When the librarian began reading a story about a clumsy king who slipped on banana peels, Alexander, trying to pour juice for the boys, knocked over the entire tray. Juice spilled across the floor. The twins froze. Then, as the other children giggled, Ethan pointed and burst out laughing. "Papa! You're the clumsy king!" Noah joined in. "He really is." Maya bit her lip to hide a smile. Alexander looked down at the mess, then at his sons, laughing, free, and something inside him cracked open. He didn't scold. Didn't stiffen. He knelt, wiped the floor with a napkin, and said, "Guilty as charged. All hail the clumsy king." The boys howled with joy. And as they walked home, hand in hand, the sun setting behind the trees, Alexander realized something profound. He wasn't just watching life return to his sons. He was living it too. It began as a quiet idea, whispered over crayons and juice boxes at the library. The children's librarian, a cheerful woman with silver-streaked hair, had smiled at the twins and said, "Next week, we're making storybooks. You can draw your own adventures." Ethan looked at Noah. Noah looked at Maya. And in that silent exchange, a spark ignited. Maya knew the rules. She knew Alexander's boundaries, the invisible walls he had built around his sons, around his heart. But she also knew that children weren't meant to live in gilded silence. They were meant to run, to speak, to make friends, to fall and get back up with scraped knees and brave smiles. So, without telling Alexander, she made a decision. On Thursday morning, she knocked on the boys' bedroom door. Magic Cleaning Club mission, secret adventure. "We're going to the library. Just us. Think you can keep a secret?" The twins' eyes widened. "But," Papa said. "He said he didn't want to go," Maya said gently. "He didn't say you couldn't." And sometimes, brave things happen when we step just a little outside the rules. With backpacks full of crayons and hearts full of courage, the three of them slipped out the back gate and walked down the winding lane, away from the mansion's shadow, toward the bright red door of the Willow Creek Library. Inside, the room buzzed with laughter. Children sat on colorful rugs, drawing dragons, spaceships, and talking cats. Maya helped the twins glue paper together, their small hands shaking at first, then growing steady. Ethan drew a knight with a golden sword. Noah made a rocket ship with 3 seats. "One for me," he whispered, "one for Ethan, and one for Maya." A little girl with pigtails leaned over. "I like your rocket. Can I be in it too?" Noah looked at Maya. She nodded. He smiled. Yes. And just like that, the world grew a little bigger. They read aloud, painted, sang songs, and even played freeze dance, where Ethan, after a long hesitation, finally jumped when the music played. For the first time in years, the twins weren't just observed, they were seen. They weren't just quiet boys from the big house on the hill. They were Ethan and Noah. And someone cared. But as the afternoon sun slanted gold across the floor, the library door opened. Alexander stood in the doorway. His face was unreadable, sharp, still, like stone. His eyes swept the room, landed on Maya, then on his sons, laughing, covered in glitter, holding hands with other children. "Maya," he said, voice low. "We need to talk. Now." Her heart dropped. She nodded, excused herself, and followed him outside. "You knew the rules," he said, anger simmering beneath his words. "No outings. No risks. No exposing them to." "To what?" Maya interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "To being children. Mr. Kingston, they made friends today. They spoke. They laughed. They lived. Isn't that what you wanted for them?" "That's not your decision to make," he snapped. "You're an employee. You don't get to." "Dad." Ethan stood in the doorway, small but fierce. Noah beside him, gripping his brother's hand. "She didn't do anything wrong," Ethan said, voice trembling but clear. "We wanted to come. We asked her." "We're not broken," Noah added. "We just needed someone to help us remember how to be happy." Alexander's breath caught. "She makes us laugh," Ethan said, tears in his eyes. "And you never laugh. And we miss Mama every day. But Maya, she doesn't make us forget. She makes it okay to not be sad all the time." Silence fell. Alexander looked at his sons, really looked. Their cheeks were flushed with life. Their eyes sparkled. They stood tall, not hiding. And for the first time, he saw not just his wife's absence, but her presence. In their courage. In their love. In the music that had once filled the house, now returning in their voices. That night, long after the boys were asleep, Alexander walked to the drawing room. He lifted the cello from its case, cradled it gently, and placed it under his chin. His fingers, stiff at first, found the strings. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, he played the shepherd's lullaby. From the top of the stairs, two small figures watched in silence, their hearts full. The house was no longer holding its breath. It was learning to sing again. The evening began like any other in the Kingston mansion, soft lamplight spilling across polished floors, the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary lingering from dinner, and the quiet rhythm of a household that had, somehow, become a home again. But this night felt different. There was a hush in the air, not of sadness, but of something tender unfolding, like the first breath before a song begins. After dinner, the twins refused to go to bed. Instead, they dragged their blankets and pillows into the grand sitting room, where the fireplace flickered with a warm, crackling fire. Maya sat on the rug, her back against the sofa, reading them a story about a lonely castle that learned to laugh again. Ethan rested his head on her shoulder. Noah curled up beside her, eyes heavy but unwilling to miss a word. Alexander watched from the doorway, arms crossed, not as a master of the house, but as a man slowly remembering how to belong. Then, in the middle of a sentence, Ethan looked up and said, clear as a bell, "Papa, we should keep Maya forever." The room stilled. Noah nodded, his voice sleepy but certain. "She makes the house alive again." Alexander didn't speak at once. He stepped inside, the firelight painting shadows and gold across his face. Maya closed the book gently, her heart pounding. She had known this moment might come, the moment when trust would be tested, when boundaries would blur, when the truth could no longer be ignored. Alexander walked slowly to the hearth and knelt, not in authority, but in humility. He looked at Maya, not as an employer, not as a man guarding his grief, but as someone who had been brought back from the edge. "Maya," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you were hired to clean this house." He paused, glancing at his sons, then back at her. "But you didn't just clean the floors or dust the shelves. You cleaned the silence. You swept away the shadows no one dared to name." He swallowed hard. "You played a song no one had the courage to touch. You took my sons into the world when I was too afraid to open the door. And you made them laugh, truly laugh, when I thought that sound was lost forever." Tears glistened in Maya's eyes. The twins watched, breathless. "So no," Alexander continued, "you are not just a housekeeper." He gave a small, tender smile. "You're the reason this house breathes again. The reason I remember how to." He looked at his sons. "And if you too want Maya to stay." "We do," they said together. "Then she stays," Alexander said softly. "Not because of a contract, but because she's family." Maya covered her mouth, tears slipping free. All she had wanted was to do her job with kindness. She had never expected to be seen, to be needed, to be loved. Later, as the fire dimmed and the boys fell asleep, one on Maya's lap, the other tucked against her side, Alexander sat beside her, close but not too close, their shoulders nearly touching. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Outside, the wind brushed the trees. Inside, the cello sat in the corner, no longer covered. And from somewhere deep in the house, almost like a whisper, came the faintest hum, a lullaby, remembered, returning. The mansion was no longer a monument to loss. It was a home, alive, healing, and full of hope. And in the quiet glow of the fire, four hearts beat together, slowly mending, one breath at a time. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart, if the silence of the Kingston mansion, the courage of Maya, the laughter of Ethan and Noah, or Alexander's quiet journey back to life moved you, then you're not alone. Stories like this remind us that healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes, it arrives humming a tune while dusting a shelf. Sometimes, it wears a mismatched apron and teaches broken hearts how to laugh again. If you believe in the power of small kindnesses, in second chances, and in the courage it takes to open a door after years of keeping it shut, then please share this story. Send it to someone who's carrying a quiet grief. Read it to a child who needs to feel seen. Pass it on to a friend who's forgotten how to hope. And if you'd like to read more heartfelt, emotional tales like The Arrival of Hope, stories that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the last line, follow me for more. Because every heart deserves a story that speaks to it. And every home, no matter how silent, can learn to sing again. Thank you for reading. Now go, bring a little light somewhere. Just like Maya did.